My parents liked to tell the neighbors I had thrown away a six-figure future to play martyr, but the truth was usually buried under a stack of eviction notices in my apartment above a laundromat. While my brother Evan was cementing the Martin legacy in steel and glass, I was just trying to pay the rent. They called me the failure, never suspecting that the very career they mocked was about to put a gavel in my hand. The floorboards beneath my bed vibrated with the rhythmic, mechanical thrum of the industrial dryers running downstairs. It was 5 a.m. on a Monday, and the laundromat below my apartment was already chewing through the neighborhood's weekend grime. This was my alarm clock. I rolled over, burying my face in a pillow that smelled faintly of detergent and stale coffee, and tried to ignore the math problem that greeted me every time I opened my eyes. 33 years old, $182,000 in student loan debt, 2 jobs, one cramped apartment that cost 40% of my take-home pay. I sat up, pushing the heavy quilt aside. The air in the room was thick and cold, a hallmark of Riverton winters where the wind whipped off the river and found every crack in the brickwork. I shuffled to the kitchenette, which was really just a glorified closet with a hot plate and a mini fridge, and started the kettle, while the water boiled. I reviewed the mental checklist of the day. I had a property law lecture to deliver at Riverton Community College at 6 p.m, but before that, I had the cattle call, the eviction docket. My stomach turned over, a familiar mix of adrenaline and dread. I worked for the Harbor Street Justice Center, a scrappy nonprofit squeezed between a pawn shop and a liquor store. We were the last line of defense for people who were usually 3 months behind on luck before they even walked through our door. The pay was abysmal, the hours were laughable, and the emotional toll was heavy enough to crush a person's spine. My parents told everyone I was finding myself. My brother told everyone I was wasting myself. I dressed in the dark, pulling on a charcoal suit that I had bought 5 years ago when I was a summer associate at a white shoe firm. The fabric was high quality, but the lining was fraying, a secret only I knew. I grabbed my briefcase, a battered leather satchel that weighed a ton, and headed out into the gray pre-dawn light. The courthouse in Riverton was an imposing brutalist structure of concrete and hostility. By the time I cleared security, breathless and sweating under my coat, the hallway outside courtroom 3B was already a sea of desperation. Mothers bounced fussing babies on their hips, men in work boots stared at the floor, and landlords stood in clusters near the windows, clutching manila folders and checking their watches. I did not have enough time. I never had enough time. Grace. I turned to see Lena, the Justice Center's paralegal, waving a stack of files at me. She looked as harried as I felt, her curly hair escaping its bun. "Here are the intakes," she said, shoving the papers into my arms. "You have 5 hearings, 2 are no-shows, 1 is a consent judgment, but the last 2 are contesting. Mrs. Gable in the wheelchair over there? She just got served on Friday. She has no idea what is happening." I looked where she pointed. Mrs. Gable was a tiny woman, wrapped in a knitted shawl, looking terrified. "Friday?" I asked, flipping open the file. "That is not proper notice. Tell the judge," Lena said, already moving on to the next crisis. "Good luck." I took a breath and walked over to Mrs. Gable. For the next 3 hours, I was not Grace Martin, the disappointment of the Martin family dynasty. I was a shield. I introduced myself, crouched down to her eye level, and listened to a story I had heard 1,000 times but which never lost its sting. Her Social Security check was late. The landlord refused a partial payment. He wanted her out so he could renovate and jack up the rent by $400. When the bailiff called her case, I stood up. My knees popped. Judge Holloway was on the bench today. He was a man who viewed court dockets like an assembly line. Efficiency was his god, and delays were his sins. "Your Honor, Grace Martin for the defense," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. It was a lawyer trick, sounding bigger than you felt. "Ms. Martin," Judge Holloway sighed, looking over his spectacles. "I see you are holding up my mourning. What is the issue?" "Improper service, Your Honor." My client received the summons less than 1 business day before this hearing. Under the state statute, she's entitled to 3 days minimum notice. We move for a dismissal or, at the very least, a continuance to prepare a defense. The landlord's attorney, a bored-looking man in a suit that cost more than my car, rolled his eyes. Your Honor, the tenant is clearly aware of the proceeding. She is here. She is here because she is terrified. I shot back, not looking at him, but the law is the law. You cannot evict an 80-year-old woman without following the rules of civil procedure. The judge stared at me. I held his gaze. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but I kept my hands steady on the table. Fine. Holloway grunted. Continuance granted. 2 weeks. Get your paperwork in order. Counselor. Next case? I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Beside me, Mrs. Gable grabbed my hand, her skin like dry paper. Thank you, she whispered. Oh, thank you. It was a small win, a tiny, fragile stopgap. I had bought her 14 days of shelter. It wasn't a victory in the grand scheme of the war, but for tonight, she would sleep in her own bed. As I walked out of the courtroom, dodging the next wave of litigants, I felt a fleeting sense of competence. I was good at this. I was making a difference, inch by inch. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Don't be late. Evan has big news. 7 o'clock sharp. The feeling of competence evaporated, replaced by the heavy, familiar stone of obligation. The drive from Riverton to Ruston Springs took 45 minutes, but it felt like traveling between 2 different planets. I left the city limits, with its cracked pavement and neon signs, and merged onto the highway that led to the suburbs. The further west I drove. The greener the grass became. The houses grew wider, the driveways longer, the fences wider. Ruston Springs was the kind of town where the high school football coach was the highest-paid public employee and people mowed their lawns in diagonal stripes. It was where I grew up. It was where my parents, Carl and Diane Martin, had built their kingdom. I pulled my 10-year-old sedan into the driveway of the family home. It was a sprawling colonial that my father had expanded 3 times over the last 20 years. Every addition was a testament to a good year in the construction business. The house loomed against the twilight, its windows glowing with warm, golden light. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I reapplied my lipstick, smoothed my hair, and put on my armor. Inside, the house smelled of roasting meat and expensive potpourri. Grace, you made it! My mother came down the hall, wiping her hands on a decorative towel she would never actually let anyone use. She was a woman who fought aging with the same ferocity my father fought zoning boards. Her hair was a perfect, immobile helmet of blonde, and her smile was tight. Hi. Mom, I said, leaning in for a kiss that barely grazed her cheek. You look tired, she said, holding me at arm's length. Are you eating? You look thin. And that suit, is that the one from your old firm? It's looking a little worn. Honey, I'm fine. Mom, just busy. Doing what? Saving the world, one deadbeat at a time? My father's voice boomed from the living room. Carl Martin appeared in the doorway, a Scotch glass in one hand. He was a large man, built like the bulldozers he owned, with a face reddened by years of wind and high blood pressure. Hi, Dad, I said, bracing myself. He wrapped me in a bear hug that smelled of expensive cologne and scotch. Good to see you, Gracie, even if you are dressed like a public defender. I am a public defender. Dad, sort of. He laughed, a loud barking sound. Yeah. Come on in. Evan is pouring drinks. We are celebrating. I followed them into the living room. My brother, Evan, was standing by the wet bar. He was 2 years older than me, 35, and he was the golden sun around which the Martin family solar system revolved. He had the same square jaw as our father, but softer hands. He wore a crisp button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up just so, displaying a watch that cost as much as my student loans for a semester. Hey, Slick, he said, handing me a glass of white wine without asking what I wanted. "Hi, Evan. Congratulations on whatever it is." He grinned. The confident smile of a man who has never heard the word no. "The Riverfront Plaza deal. We closed today." "That's great," I said, taking a sip. The wine was oaky and cold. "Great?" my mother scoffed. Settling onto the white sofa, "It is monumental. The biggest commercial contract in county history. Your brother is a genius." She gestured to the coffee table, where 3 framed newspaper clippings were arranged like holy relics. The headlines screamed, "Martin Ridge Development secures prime real estate and local sun reshapes downtown." I looked at the photos. Evan shaking hands with the mayor. Evan pointing at a blueprint. Evan looking visionary in a hard hat he probably wore for 5 minutes. "We are so proud," my mother continued, beaming at him. "It is the Martin legacy." I sat in the armchair in the corner, the one I always sat in, feeling the familiar shrinkage. In this house, I was not the attorney who had just outmaneuvered a seasoned litigator to save an old woman's home. I was the subplot. I was the footnote. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a prime rib roast, potatoes swimming in butter, glazed carrots. It was a meal designed to showcase prosperity. We were joined by my Uncle Jerry and Aunt Linda, and my cousin Kayla, who was 22 and lived her entire life through the screen of her smartphone. "So, Grace," my mother said loudly, as she passed the gravy boat, "have you thought any more about what we discussed?" I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What did we discuss?" "Your career," she said. "Or, well, getting back on track. I saw Mrs. Rhodes at the club yesterday. She told me Tyler just made partner at Sterling and Crown. Can you believe it? Youngest partner in the firm's history." The name hit me like a physical blow. Tyler, my ex, the man who had proposed to me right after law school. The man I had left because his version of a life looked like a prison cell made of gold bars. "That is nice for him," I said quietly. "Nice?" My mother laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "It is incredible. He is making $500,000 a year. Grace, and he is what? Your age?" "He is a year older," I said. My father chimed in, slicing his meat with vigor. "That boy has a head on his shoulders. He didn't run off to save the whales or whatever it is you are doing down there in the slums. He stuck it out. He played the game." "I didn't run off," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I made a choice. I wanted to do work that actually helps people." "Help people?" Uncle Jerry snorted. He was my father's younger brother, a man who had ridden my father's coattails into middle management and resented everyone for it. "You can help people with a checkbook. Grace, you make real money. You write a check to charity. You don't have to go down there and wallow in the mud with them." "I am not wallowing." I said, "I am a lawyer. I represent tenants who are being illegally evicted." My father waved his fork at me. "Left the big leagues to play charity lawyer. That is what I tell the guys at the golf course. My daughter the saint. They all get a kick out of it." Around the table, a ripple of uncomfortable laughter went up. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. It wasn't just the teasing, it was the dismissal, the complete inability to see my life as anything other than a punchline. "Let's not pick on Grace," Evan said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "Not everyone is cut out for the pressure of the real world." I looked at him sharply. "Excuse me?" "I'm just saying," he continued, swirling his wine. "Corporate law is a grinder. You burned out. It happens. No shame in taking the slow lane." "I didn't burn out," I said, my voice tightening. "I quit. There is a difference. I didn't like who I was becoming." Evan smirked. "Right. Principles. Very noble." My father cleared his throat, tapping his knife against his wine glass. The sound cut through the tension. All right. Enough about Grace's little hobbies. We have serious business to discuss." He stood up, looking around the table with the air of a king addressing his court. "As you all know, Evan has been taking on more and more responsibility at Martin Ridge. This new deal proves what your mother and I have known for a long time. He is ready." He placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. "We met with the estate attorneys last week," He announced, "We have updated the family succession plan." I went still. This was something they had talked about vaguely for years, but never in specifics. "When I retire," my father said, "Evan will inherit the controlling interest in Martin Ridge Development. He will take over as CEO. We are also signing over the deed to this house to him, effective immediately, though your mother and I will keep living here, of course." He paused for applause. Uncle Jerry clapped loudly. Aunt Linda beamed. Kayla didn't look up from her phone. I sat there, waiting for the rest of the sentence. "And Grace?" I asked. My father looked at me, as if surprised I was still there. "You are taken care of." "Gracie," he said benevolently, "we set up a nice life insurance policy. When we pass, you will get a lump sum. 50,000. 50,000? I repeated. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. "The business is worth millions," I said, looking from my father to Evan. "The real estate alone. It is a business asset, Grace," Evan said, his voice dropping into that condescending register he used for contractors he was about to shortchange. "You can't chop it up. It has to stay intact to function. And since you are not in the business, it is practical," my mother added, nodding. "You have your own life in the city. You have never shown any interest in the company. Evan has poured his sweat into this. I haven't shown interest because you never let me in the door," I said, my voice rising. "I spent summers filing paperwork while Evan got to go to job sites. You told me to go to law school so I could be the company counsel. And when I did, you hired an outside firm. We hired Sterling and Crown because they are the best," my father said, his face darkening. "And I am what? The chopped liver?" "Grace, stop it," my mother hissed. "You are embarrassing yourself. You should be happy for your brother." "Happy?" I looked at Evan. He wasn't even looking at me. He was examining his cuticles, looking bored. "You are cutting me out." I said, "That is what this is. Nobody is cutting you out," my father said, his voice booming again. "We are protecting the legacy. If we gave you half the shares, what would you do? Sell them? Donate them to your little nonprofit? We built this company from nothing. Grace, I won't let you flush it down the toilet because you are on some crusade." I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and stinging. I fought them back. I would not cry. Not here, not in front of them. "I am a good lawyer," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Today I stopped a landlord from throwing an 80-year-old woman onto the street. I found a loophole in the service requirements that nobody else saw. Uncle Jerry laughed. "A loophole. Great. That pays the bills, does it?" "Tyler Rhodes just bought a house in the hills," Evan said quietly. "Just saying." He knew how to use his degree. That snapped something inside me. A thin, tight wire that had been holding me together for years. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "You think Tyler a success?" I asked, looking at Evan. "Tyler defends chemical companies that poison groundwater. He drafts contracts that strip workers of their pensions. That is what you admire? It is called the real world." "Grace," Evan said. "And your business?" I asked, leaning over the table. "Martin Ridge? I see the permits you pull. I see the subcontractors you use. You guys are operating on razor-thin margins. You are cutting corners on safety to maximize square footage." "That is a lie," my father roared, slamming his fork down. The silver clattered against the fine china. A violent sound that made Aunt Linda jump. "Is it?" I challenged him. "I know how you built the West Side complex. I know about the wiring issues you paid the inspector to ignore." My father's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple. "How dare you?" he spat. "How dare you sit at my table, eat my food, and accuse me of fraud? You are jealous. That is all this is. You are jealous of your brother because he is a winner, and you are a loser who lives above a laundromat. You are disrespecting everything we built," my mother shouted. I looked around the table. Uncle Jerry was shaking his head in disgust. Aunt Linda was staring at her plate. And there, at the end of the table, Kayla was holding her phone up. The camera lens pointed directly at me. She was recording. The shame washed over me like ice water. I was the entertainment. I was the family screw-up, the dramatic daughter having a meltdown for the digital archive. I pushed away from the table. "I'm leaving," I said. "Grace, sit down," my father commanded. I walked out. I walked out of the dining room, past the framed photos of Evan, and up the stairs. I didn't go to the front door because my coat was upstairs in my old room, and some childish instinct drew me there. I slammed the door of my childhood bedroom and leaned against it, gasping for air. The room was a time capsule. It had been preserved exactly as it was the day I left for college. Lavender walls, a bedspread with white daisies, and on the shelf, lined up in a neat row, were the trophies: debate team captain, mock trial champion, valedictorian. The gold plastic figurines stared back at me, mocking. They represented a promise. Grace Martin, the girl who is going places. I walked over and touched the cool metal of the mock trial gavel. I had been so sure back then. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was smart enough, if I was perfect enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Evan. But the goalposts always moved. First it was get into law school, then it was get a big firm job, then it was make partner. Now it was, why aren't you Tyler? I sat on the edge of the twin bed and put my head in my hands. The tears finally came, hot and silent. I cried for the little girl who tried so hard. I cried for the woman who was drowning in debt. I cried for the family I wanted but didn't have. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, wiping my eyes. It was an email notification. Subject: Thank you. It was from Mr. Henderson, a client I had helped last week. He had been facing an illegal lockout. I had threatened the landlord with a lawsuit, and the landlord had backed down. Dear Ms. Martin, I just wanted to say thank you again. The heat is back on. My kids are warm tonight because of you. God bless you. I read the words 3 times. My kids are warm tonight because of you. I looked up at the trophies. Then I looked at the email. My father called me a loser. Evan called me a failure. But to Mr. Henderson, I was a savior. I stood up. I went to the mirror and wiped my face. My eyes were red, but there was something else there, too. A hardness, a clarity. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep half living between their approval and my own choices. If I kept coming back here, begging for scraps of affection, I would starve to death. I grabbed my coat and my bag. I walked downstairs. The dining room was silent now, the air thick with tension. I didn't look in. I walked straight to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the night. I didn't say goodbye. The drive back to Riverton was a blur of highway lights and dark thoughts. My mind replayed the argument on a loop, one burst pipe away from a lawsuit. I had said it in anger, but as the miles rolled by, the words settled in my gut with a heavy weight. I knew how Evan operated. I knew how my father taught him. Profit first, paperwork later. I reached the city limits around 11 o'clock. The transition was abrupt. Smooth asphalt gave way to potholes, and manicured lawns gave way to concrete blocks. I was taking a shortcut to my apartment, a route that took me through the East District, a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. It was the kind of place where hipster coffee shops sat next to boarded-up row houses. I turned a corner and saw it. It was a new acquisition. I recognized the sign out front. Future home of luxury living, but underneath that, in smaller letters, was the management company name, Martin Ridge Properties. It was one of the buildings Evan had bragged about buying a few months ago. He had called it a fixer-upper with potential. I slowed the car. The building was a 4-story brick walk-up, looking tired and neglected. The streetlights cast long, yellow shadows against the facade, and there, taped to the front door, was a row of bright pink pieces of paper. I knew that color. I saw it every day. Eviction notices. There must have been 10 of them, a whole column of families being told to get out. I pulled the car over to the curb and idled there for a moment, the engine humming softly. I stared at the pink squares fluttering in the cold wind. Evan had just bought this place. He was celebrating a massive commercial deal tonight, eating prime rib and drinking scotch, while here, in the dark, His business plan was playing out in paper and ink. He was clearing the decks. He was purging the building so he could renovate and triple the rents. It was business, just business. But as I watched a light flick on in a third-floor window, casting a silhouette against the shade, I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. I thought about Mrs. Gable's shaking hands. I thought about Mr. Henderson's email. I thought about my father's red face screaming about his legacy. This wasn't just a building, it was a battlefield, and whether I liked it or not, the war had just followed me home. I put the car in gear and drove away, but the image of those pink notices burned into my retinas, a neon warning sign of the storm that was about to break. The bell above the glass door of the Harbor Street Justice Center jingled, a cheerful sound that was almost always followed by bad news. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a week after the disastrous dinner at my parents' house. I was sitting at my desk, buried under a stack of disability appeals, trying to ignore the headache that had taken up permanent residence behind my left eye. The office smelled of old paper, toner, and the cheap coffee Lena brewed in 5-gallon batches. I looked up as the door opened. It wasn't just one person, it was a procession. 6 people walked in, huddled together like sheep in a storm. They looked exhausted. Their clothes were worn, their faces tight with that specific, hollow-eyed anxiety that comes from not knowing where you are going to sleep next week. Leading them was a man clutching a sheaf of papers so tightly his knuckles were white. "Can we help you?" Lena asked from the front desk, her voice softening from its usual administrative bark. "We need a lawyer," the man said. His accent was thick, his voice trembling. "They gave us 3 days. I stood up, drawn by the desperation in the room. I walked over to the intake counter. 3 days for what?" I asked. "To get out," the woman beside him said. She was holding a toddler who was sound asleep on her shoulder, his mouth open in a pink O. "The new owners. They said the building is being renovated. Everyone out. May I see that?" I asked, reaching for the papers. The man handed them to me. I smoothed out the crumpled notice on the counter. It was a standard notice to quit, aggressive and barely legal, citing vague renovation plans and immediate termination of tenancy. My eyes scanned the boilerplate text, looking for the landlord's name, and then the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Property owner, Horizon Vista Holdings, LLC. I stared at the name. My breath caught in my throat. Horizon Vista. It sounded generic, the kind of name you buy off a shelf, but I knew it. I had seen it on a file folder on my father's desk years ago. I had seen it on the return address of envelopes Evan tossed into the shredder. It was a holding company, a shell, a mask. "Who owns your building?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my heart had started a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. "We do not know," the man said. "We send the checks to a PEO box in Ruston Springs. Ruston Springs, of course." I looked at Lena. She was watching me, her eyes narrowing as she registered the blood draining from my face. "Grace?" she said. "What is it?" "I need to take this." I said, "Grace, your docket is full. I need to take this." I repeated, louder this time. "Bring them back to the conference room." An hour later, I was sitting in Lena's office, the door closed. The blinds were drawn, slicing the afternoon sun into dusty strips on the linoleum floor. "Are you insane?" Lena asked. She was leaning back in her chair, arms crossed, looking at me like I had just suggested we set the building on fire. "It is them." "Lena," I said. I was pacing the small room, unable to sit still. "Horizon Vista is a subsidiary of Martin Ridge. My brother uses it to acquire distressed properties so the main brand does not get tarnished by the eviction process. So you want to sue your brother," Lena stated flatly. "I want to stop an illegal eviction." I corrected her. "Grace, listen to me." Lena sat forward, her expression serious. "I know you and your family have issues. I know they treat you like the black sheep. But this is nuclear. If you file an appearance against a company owned by your father and brother, you are crossing a line you can never uncross. They are tripling the rent. Lena, I stopped pacing and leaned my hands on her desk. I talked to those people. They have lived there for 10 years. The new management took over 6 months ago. Since then, the heat has been spotty, the trash is not collected, and now they are kicking them out with 3 days of notice because they want to flip the units. And if you take the case, the conflict of interest could blow back on us. Lena warned, if they find out you are using nonprofit resources to settle a family grudge. It is not a grudge, I snapped. Then I lowered my voice. It is not a grudge. It is the law. Lena looked at me for a long time. She looked at the determined set of my jaw, the way my hands were shaking. She sighed, rubbing her temples. We do not have anyone else, she admitted quietly. David is on paternity leave. Sarah is buried in the class action suit. If you do not take them, I have to turn them away. I knew that. She knew that. Take the case, Lena said, waving a hand dismissively. But Grace, if this goes sideways, if this becomes a circus, I know. I said, it is on me. That night, I did not sleep. My apartment was silent, save for the occasional siren wailing in the distance. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by property records I had pulled from the county database. It was all there. A paper trail of calculated neglect. Martin Ridge Development had purchased the apartment complex, known as the Horizon Vista Apartments. 6 months ago, the purchase price was suspiciously low. Immediately after the sale, the maintenance requests spiked. I had printed out the complaints filed with the City Housing Authority. October 12th, broken boiler, no heat for 4 days. November 3rd, severe mold in Unit 2B, child hospitalized with asthma. December 1st, electrical sparking in the hallway. Each complaint was marked closed or resolved with no notes on what repairs were actually done. I rubbed my eyes, the grainy feeling of exhaustion seeping into my bones. This was the Martin business model my father had perfected and Evan had weaponized. Buy cheap, squeeze the tenants until they leave or break, do cosmetic renovations, and sell or rent high. It was gentrification with a serrated edge. But reading the papers was one thing, hearing the voices was another. Earlier that afternoon, I had interviewed the tenants one by one. Their stories were a chorus of misery that echoed in my quiet kitchen. Mr. Alvarez, the man who had led the group, was a single father working the graveyard shift at a distribution center. I come home at 6 a.m, he had told me, twisting his cap in his hands. I just want to sleep, but the windows rattle because the frames are rotted. The water is brown. My daughter, she is afraid to shower. I told the manager. He told me if I do not like it, I can leave. Where do I go? Ms. Martin? Rents in this city are $2,000 now. I make $18 an hour. Then there was Mrs. Higgins, a home health aide. She was caring for her younger sister, who had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. The elevator has been broken for 3 weeks, she said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. We live on the 3rd floor. Do you know what it is like to carry a grown woman down 3 flights of stairs so she can go to a doctor's appointment? I called the office. They said they are waiting for a part. For 3 weeks? And Sarah, the grocery store cashier, she showed me pictures on her phone of black mold creeping up the wall behind her bed like a slow-moving cancer. I wake up coughing. She wheezed. My inhaler runs out every 2 weeks. I asked them to fix the leak in the roof. They painted over the mold. Just painted over it. It came back in 2 days. I looked at the stack of papers. I looked at the corporate filing that listed Evan Martin as the registered agent for Horizon Vista Holdings. I could walk away. I could tell Lena I was too close to it. I could refer them to legal aid in the next county, knowing they would probably get lost in the system. I could preserve the fragile peace with my family. I could keep going to Sunday dinners and pretending I didn't know where the money for the prime rib came from. But then I would be one of them. I would be silent, and my silence would be complicit. I picked up my phone. It was almost 10 o'clock. Evan would be up. He was a night owl, usually working or drinking. I dialed his number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. What? His voice was loud, accompanied by the background noise of a bar or a party. Evan, it is Grace. I gathered that from the caller ID. What do you want? It is late. I need to ask you something, I said, gripping the phone tightly. About a property. The Horizon Vista Apartments on 4th Street. The line went quiet for a second. The background noise seemed to dip. What about it? He asked, his voice sharpening. I have tenants in my office. Evan. They have eviction notices. They say the building is falling apart. No heat, mold, broken elevators. So, I know you own it. I know Horizon Vista is you. Are you spying on me? Grace, he snapped. I am doing my job. These people are terrified. They have nowhere to go. You are kicking them out with 3 days of notice. That is illegal. It is a renovation clause, Evan said dismissively. Read the lease. We have the right to terminate for major structural work. We are doing them a favor. That place is a dump. We are going to turn it into luxury condos. It is good for the neighborhood. It is bad for the people who live there, I argued. And the conditions. Evan, the mold, the rats. You have owned it for 6 months. You let it rot on purpose to drive them out. You do not know what you are talking about, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. You have never run a business in your life. You handle parking tickets and disputes over security deposits. This is development. It is complicated. It is not complicated. It is cruel. Watch your mouth. Grace, Evan, please. I softened my voice, trying one last time to reach the brother I used to play catch with in the backyard. Just give them more time. Give them relocation assistance. Fix the immediate hazards. Don't make me fight you on this. He laughed. A cold, harsh sound. Fight me? You? Grace, do not make me laugh. You are a storefront lawyer. I have Sterling and Crown on retainer. If you get in my way, if you try to slow down this project, I will bury you. Evan, it is just business. Grace, he said, grow up. Stop meddling in things you do not understand, and do not call me about this again. The line went dead. I sat there with the phone in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry insect. It is just business. The phrase hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I put the phone down. I walked to my laptop. My hands were trembling, a fine tremor that started in my fingers and ran up my arms. I opened a new document. State of Riverton, County of Riverton, Superior Court Plaintiffs, Carlos Alvarez, et al. Versus Defendants, Horizon Vista Holdings, LLC, Martin Ridge Development, INC. I typed the names. I typed the allegations. Count 1, wrongful eviction. Count 2, breach of implied warranty of habitability. Count 3, negligence. Count 4, fraudulent misrepresentation. Count 5, misuse of state housing rehabilitation grants. That last one was a hunch, based on the records showing they had applied for state funds to fix the roof. Funds that clearly hadn't been used for the roof. I typed for hours. I poured every ounce of my legal knowledge, every shred of my frustration, every drop of my anger into that complaint. I cited statutes. I referenced case law. I built a fortress of words to protect Mr. Alvarez and Mrs. Higgins and Sarah. When I reached the signature line at the bottom, I hesitated, respectfully submitted, Grace E. Martin, attorney for plaintiffs. Typing my own name felt like cutting a tether. Once I filed this, there was no going back. I was publicly declaring war on my family. I was exposing their greed to the world. I thought about the family dinners, the legacy, the way my father looked at me with disappointment. Then I thought about the mold in Sarah's bedroom. I hit save. 2 days later, the notification came in. Case assigned to the Honorable Miriam Klein. The office groaned collectively when I read the name out loud. Oh, Grace, Lena said, shaking her head. You have the worst luck. Who is she? I asked. I knew the name, but I had never appeared before her. She sat in Superior Court, usually handling complex civil litigation, not housing disputes. They call her the Iron Maiden, Lena said grimly. She is brilliant, terrifying, and has zero patience for incompetence. She was a corporate litigator for 30 years before she took the bench. She knows every trick. If you miss a comma, she will eat you alive. Great, I muttered. And Grace? Lena added. Since you named the parent company, Martin Ridge. You know who is going to show up for the defense. I nodded. Sterling and Crown, the firm I used to work for, the firm my family worshipped, the firm where Tyler Rhodes was now a partner. You need to prepare, Lena said, like the rest of your life depends on it. Because honestly, it kind of does. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow. I arrived at the courthouse an hour early, dragging a cart filled with 3 bankers' boxes of evidence. I had barely slept in a week. My eyes felt gritty, and my stomach was a knot of anxiety. Courtroom 4A was cavernous. It smelled of wood polish and authority. I set up my table on the plaintiff's side, arranging my files in meticulous stacks. I had photos. I had inspection reports. I had affidavits from the tenants. At 9 o'clock, the doors swung open. In walked the defense. It wasn't just one lawyer. It was a phalanx. 3 associates in matching navy suits marched in, carrying leather briefcases. Behind them came the partner. My heart sank. It was Marcus Thorne. He was a legend at Sterling and Crown. A man who billed $800 an hour and had never seen a settlement he didn't dictate. He had been my supervising partner when I was a junior associate. He was the one who had told me, when I resigned, that I lacked the killer instinct. He saw me and paused. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. Well, he said, his voice smooth and caring across the quiet room. Ms. Martin. I saw the name on the docket, but I assumed it was a coincidence. Hello? Mr. Thorne, I said, trying to keep my voice from squeaking. I didn't know you were practicing, he said, glancing at my frayed suit and my cardboard boxes. And suing your own family? That is a bold strategy. Bold or desperate. I am representing my clients. Mr. Thorne, he chuckled, turning to his associates. You hear that? She is representing her clients. This should be entertaining. He set his briefcase down on the defense table with a heavy thud. It was a power move. Everything he did was a power move. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Superior Court is now in session. The Honorable Miriam Klein presiding. Judge Klein swept into the room. She was a small woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses perched on the end of her nose. But she moved with a terrifying energy. She didn't walk. She marched. She took the bench, arranged her robes, and looked down at us over her spectacles. Her gaze was like a laser beam. Good morning, she said crisply. We are here on the matter of Alvarez versus Horizon Vista. I have read the complaint and the emergency motion for injunctive relief. She looked at me. Counsel for the plaintiff, state your appearance, Grace Martin. For the plaintiffs, Your Honor. She looked at the defense table. Marcus Thorne, Sterling and Crown, representing the defendants. Horizon Vista and Martin Ridge Development. Judge Klein raised an eyebrow. Mr. Thorne, a little far from the ivory tower, aren't we? We take the allegations against our client very seriously. Your Honor, Thorne said smoothly, especially given the personal nature of the suit. Klein ignored the bait. Ms. Martin, this is your motion. You are asking this court to halt an eviction process that, on its face, appears to be consistent with the lease terms regarding renovation. Why should I intervene? I stood up. My knees felt like water. I cleared my throat. Your Honor, the eviction notices are a pretext. I stammered. The defendants are claiming renovation, but the building has been in a state of disrepair for 6 months. They have ignored habitability laws. Under the Landlord-Tenant Act, Section 47A. I flipped frantically through my notes. I couldn't find the subsection. Counselor, Judge Klein interrupted, her voice sharp. If you are going to cite the statute, cite it correctly. It is Section 47-23C regarding elderly and disabled tenants, and Section 47-7 regarding landlord responsibilities. Do not waste my time fumbling for page numbers. I felt my face burning. Thorne snickered softly. I apologize, Your Honor, I said, taking a deep breath. I abandoned the notes. I looked at the tenants sitting in the gallery behind me. I saw Mr. Alvarez's tired face. Your Honor, I said, my voice steadying. The statute numbers matter, but the facts matter more. The defendants bought this building and immediately stopped maintaining it. They let mold grow. They let the heat fail in December. They created conditions so unbearable that tenants would leave voluntarily. When that didn't work fast enough, they issued these notices. This isn't a renovation. It is a constructive eviction. It is a purge. Thorne shot up. Objection. Speculation. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Klein said. But she was watching me. Stick to the evidence. Ms. Martin, I have evidence, I said, grabbing a photo. This is the boiler room log. It shows 17 service calls in 2 months, all ignored. This is a photo of the electrical box, which an independent inspector yesterday called a fire hazard. My clients are not refusing to move because they are stubborn. They are refusing to move because they are being bullied out of their homes without due process. In the middle of winter, by a landlord who has acted in bad faith from day one, I put the photo down. If the court allows these evictions to proceed today, 30 families will be homeless by Friday. That is the reality. The law is designed to prevent exactly this kind of predatory behavior. I sat down, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might be audible. Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, this is a touching narrative, but it is fiction. My client has a right to improve their property. The building is old. It needs work. We cannot do the work with tenants inside. We have offered lease terminations in accordance with the contract. The plaintiff's counsel is trying to rewrite the contract because she has a personal vendetta against the owners. Is that so? Klein asked. Thorne smiled. It is no secret, Your Honor, that Ms. Martin is the estranged sister of the owner of Martin Ridge. This lawsuit is a family therapy session disguised as a legal complaint. Judge Klein stared at him. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice dropping to a chilly register. I do not care about your client's family tree. I care about the fact that I have an affidavit here from a city inspector stating that the building has code violations dating back to August. She shuffled the papers on her bench. You are telling me your client wants to renovate. Fine, but you cannot evict tenants for renovations when the building has been uninhabitable due to your client's negligence for half a year. That is called unclean hands. Mr. Thorne, I learned that in the first year of law school. Did you forget it? Thorne's smile vanished. Your Honor, Judge Klein banged her gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Temporary injunction granted. She declared, no evictions for 30 days. I am ordering an immediate independent inspection of the premises by a court-appointed master. The defendants will pay for it. She looked at me, then at Thorne. And let me be clear. This court will not allow people to be put on the street without a proper look. If I find that your client has been manufacturing this crisis, Mr. Thorne, the fines will be substantial. We will reconvene in 4 weeks. She stood up. All rise. I slumped in my chair. I couldn't believe it. I had won. For now. Thorne walked past my table. He didn't look at me. He looked furious. He snapped at his associates, and they scrambled to pack up. I began gathering my own messy piles of paper. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped a pen. Ms. Martin. I looked up. Judge Klein was still on the bench. Though the court reporter had left, she was looking down at me. Approach the bench, she said. I walked to the front of the room, feeling small. Thorne was gone. It was just me and the Iron Maiden. I apologize for the citation error. Your Honor, I whispered. Klein waved a hand. You were nervous. You will learn the codes. But that is not why I called you up here. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning my face. You were messy, she said bluntly. Your argument was all over the place. Thorne is going to tear you apart on procedure if you do not tighten up. Yes, Your Honor. But she continued, her voice softening just a fraction. You have something he doesn't. I blinked. What is that? You actually give a damn, she said. She picked up a pen and scribbled something on a piece of paper, then handed it to me. There is a judicial shadowing seminar next month. It is usually for third-year associates at big firms, but I run it. You should apply. I took the paper. It was a brochure for the Riverton Bar Association Mentorship Program. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. Because, she muttered, looking away as if embarrassed by her own kindness. You are rough, Ms. Martin. You are unpolished, but you fight like someone who remembers these are people, not file numbers, and God knows we need more of that in this building. She looked back at me, her face returning to its usual stony mask. Now get out of my courtroom, and fix your citations before next month. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. I walked out of the courtroom, clutching the brochure and my case files. In the hallway, the tenants were waiting. Mr. Alvarez had tears in his eyes. Mrs. Higgins hugged me. We have 30 days. I told them, we have a fighting chance. As I walked out into the cold, gray afternoon, I felt a strange new sensation. It wasn't just relief. It was a spark, a tiny, defiant flame burning in the middle of my chest. My family had declared war. Fine, I was ready to fight back. The temporary injunction was a shield, but it was made of paper. It bought my clients 30 days of shelter, but it did not buy them safety, and it certainly did not buy me peace. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in the basement records room of the Harbor Street Justice Center. It was a windowless box that smelled of mildew and stale toner, illuminated by a flickering fluorescent strip that buzzed like a trapped insect. I built a fortress out of cardboard banker's boxes, separating my life into 2 distinct piles, what Martin Ridge Development claimed was happening, and what was actually happening. I was cross-referencing. It was tedious, unglamorous work. I had the maintenance logs provided by the defense during expedited discovery, and I had the public records from the City Housing Authority. There were gaps, massive, glaring silences in the paperwork. According to the logs provided by Sterling and Crown, a tenant in Unit 4B had complained of a leak on January 10th. The log said, work order generated, pipe tightened, issue resolved. But when I pulled the water usage records for the building, the meter for that unit had spun like a top for 3 straight weeks, wasting thousands of gallons. And when I checked the City Code Enforcement database, a complaint for severe water damage and ceiling collapse had been filed on January 12th, 2 days after the issue was supposedly resolved. The city complaint was marked administratively closed. No inspection recorded, no fine levied. It was a pattern. A complaint would go in, and then it would vanish into the bureaucratic ether, while the internal logs claimed everything was perfect. I rubbed my eyes, checking the time on my phone. It was 3 a.m. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. I felt the phantom pressure of Judge Klein's gaze on me. You are rough, Ms. Martin. I would not be rough next time. I would be undeniable. 2 days later, I stood in the parking lot of Horizon Vista at 6 a.m. The sun was just bleeding over the jagged skyline of Riverton, casting a gray, hopeless light on the cracked pavement. I was not alone. I had brought backup. Arthur Miller was a housing inspector who had been with the city for 20 years. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and cigarette smoke. I had to threaten to subpoena his entire department to get him out here. But he had come. This is highly irregular. Ms. Martin, Miller grumbled, clutching a clipboard against his chest to ward off the chill. We usually schedule inspections with the property manager, if we schedule it. They hide it, I said, pulling my coat tighter. And you have a statutory obligation to investigate immediate hazards. I led him to the side entrance, where Mr. Alvarez was waiting. He held the door open, his face grim. Show him the stairwell first. I told Mr. Alvarez. We walked into the gloom of the east stairwell. The air was thick with the smell of wet rot. Mr. Alvarez pointed to the handrail between the 2nd and 3rd floors. It was hanging by a single rusted screw. If a child or an elderly person leaned on it, they would fall 10 feet onto concrete. Miller frowned. clicking his pen. He took a picture. "That is a code violation," he muttered. Then we went to Unit 2C. Sarah, the cashier with asthma, let us in. She didn't say a word. She just pointed to the corner of her bedroom. The black mold was not just a stain. It was a living thing. It had consumed the drywall, a fuzzy, toxic velvet spreading up from the baseboard. Miller pulled a moisture meter from his belt and pressed it against the wall. The device shrieked. "There is water behind there," he said. "Active leak. Probably the stack. How long has this been here?" I asked Sarah. 4 months, she whispered. I told the manager. He gave me a can of white paint. Miller shook his head, scribbling furiously. We moved through the building like a grim tour group. We saw exposed wiring in a hallway where children played. We saw a fire door chained shut from the outside. By the time we walked back out into the morning light, Miller looked shaken. He lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "I do not understand," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "I check the system before I come out. There are no open violations for this address." "I know," I said. "I have the records. Complaints are filed, and then they disappear." Miller looked at me, then looked away, watching a car drive past. "You know how it works in this town, Ms. Martin," he said quietly. "Reports go up the chain. Sometimes, if the property owner knows the right people at City Hall, the reports never make it back down to my desk. They get misplaced." He tossed the cigarette butt on the ground and ground it out with his heel. "I will write this up," he said. "I will write it all up. But you better watch your back. People who can make paperwork disappear can make other things disappear too." The email arrived on a Tuesday night. It was sent to my work address from a burner account. Justice4429, protonmail, ... .com, ... Subject: You are looking in the wrong place. Ms. Martin, I saw the news about the lawsuit. You are looking at the maintenance logs. You need to look at the grant applications. Ask about the State Housing Rehabilitation Fund. Ask why the invoices for the roof repair were paid to a consulting firm in Delaware. I can help, but not at the office. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I replied immediately. Name the place. The response came back 2 minutes later. The Blue Ribbon Diner, Route 9. Tomorrow, 9 p.m., come alone. The Blue Ribbon Diner was a relic of the 50s, a chrome and neon establishment that sat isolated on a stretch of highway between Riverton and Ruston Springs. At 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, it was mostly empty. A trucker ate pie at the counter. A couple argued in a booth near the back. I sat in a booth near the door, nursing a lukewarm tea. She walked in 5 minutes late. She was small, wearing a beige trench coat and a wool hat pulled low. She looked like a librarian or a schoolteacher. Unassuming and invisible, I recognized her instantly. Lydia Snow. She had been the junior accountant at Martin Ridge for 5 years. I had seen her at the company Christmas parties, standing awkwardly by the punch bowl while my father held court. "Lydia?" I said as she slid into the booth opposite me. "Keep your voice down," she said, her eyes darting to the trucker. She looked terrified. Her hands were wrapped around her purse as if it contained a bomb. "I didn't think you would come," I said softly. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If your father knows, or Evan." "They don't know," I assured her. "Lydia, what is going on? Why did you email me?" She took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking. "I was let go 3 months ago," she said. "They told me it was downsizing, but it was because I asked questions." "What kind of questions?" "About the grants." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver flash drive. She slid it across the Formica table. I covered it with my hand. Martin Ridge applied for $2 million in state funds to rehabilitate Horizon Vista, she said, speaking rapidly. It was supposed to go to structural repairs, roof, plumbing, HV, AC, and they spent 10% of it on paint and cosmetic fixes. She said, "The rest?" They reclassified it. They created invoices from a shell company in Delaware called Apex Consulting. Apex Consulting? It is a ghost firm, Lydia said. There are no consultants. The money goes to Apex. and then Apex lends it back to Martin Ridge as private equity to buy more properties. They are using public housing money to fund their expansion, and the tenants at Horizon Vista are living in squalor because the money meant to fix their homes is sitting in an offshore account. I felt a cold sickness spreading in my stomach. This wasn't just cutting corners. This was embezzlement. This was grand larceny. And you have proof? I asked, my fingers tightening around the drive. It is all on there, she said. The original invoices, the altered ledgers, the emails instructing me to change the coding. I looked at her. Why are you giving me this? You could go to the FBI. You could get a reward. Lydia looked down at the table. Because I have a grandmother in a nursing home, she said quietly. And last month, her building got bought by a company I recognized. I know what happens next. I know what they do. She stood up abruptly. Don't tell them it was me. Grace, please, they will ruin me. I promise, I said. Lydia, thank you. She didn't answer. She pulled her coat tight and hurried out into the night, leaving me with the silver bullet that would kill my family. I drove straight back to my apartment. I locked the door, deadbolted it, and put the chain on. I sat on my bed and plugged the drive into my laptop. The files opened, spreadsheets, scans of checks, email chains. I traced the money. It was exactly as Lydia had said. Money came in from the state, washed through the Horizon Vista account, and flowed out to Apex Consulting. Then I opened the folder marked Authorization. I needed to know who knew. I prayed, with a desperate, childish part of my heart, that it was some rogue CFO, that maybe my father and brother were just negligent, not criminal. I opened a PDF. It was a transfer authorization for $300,000 to Apex Consulting. At the bottom of the page, in blue ink, was the signature. It was bold. It was arrogant. The E was a looped flourish I had seen 1,000 times on birthday cards and school permission slips. Evan Martin, CEO. And below that, a co-signature required for transfers over a certain amount. Carl Martin, Chairman. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark, the silence of the apartment ringing in my ears. It was not a mistake. It was a family business. I felt tears sliding down my face, hot and fast. I wasn't crying for the tenants this time. I was crying because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never go home again. I had the evidence to send my brother and father to prison. The realization was a physical weight, pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe. I had wanted to prove them wrong. I had wanted to show them I was a good lawyer. I hadn't wanted to destroy them. But looking at the dark screen, I knew that was exactly what I was about to do. The story broke 2 days later. Not because of me, but because the court filings were public record. A local business blog, the Riverton Ledger, picked up on the amended complaint I had filed, referencing the discrepancies in the grant money. Martin Ridge sued for fraud. Sister alleges misuse of state funds. The headline screamed across the internet. I was at the Justice Center, trying to focus on a custody case. When the phone at the front desk rang, Lena answered it. I saw her face go pale. She hung up and looked at me. Security is on their way up, she said. Your parents are here. I stood up just as the double doors to the waiting room flew open. They didn't look like the polished titans of industry I saw at dinners. They looked like a storm front. My father's face was a mottled red, his tie loosened. My mother was wearing sunglasses indoors, her mouth a thin, trembling line. Grace, my father bellowed. The waiting room was full. A young mother covered her child's ears. Dad, you cannot be here, I said, walking out from behind the intake desk to intercept them. This is a place of business. Business? He spat the word. You talk about business? You are trying to destroy this family. He waved a printout of the blog post in the air. Fraud? He shouted. You accuse your own brother of fraud in a public filing? Do you have any idea what you have done? The bank called this morning. They are freezing our lines of credit. You are bankrupting us. We didn't raise you to be a traitor. Grace, my mother hissed, stepping forward. She took off her glasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. We gave you everything. We paid for that law school. We supported you when you failed at the big firm. And this is how you repay us? By airing dirty laundry for the whole world to see? I didn't fail. Mom, I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to be heard over the hum of the office. And I am not airing dirty laundry. I am representing my clients. Your clients? My father laughed. A harsh barking sound. They are nobodies. They are leeches. You are choosing strangers over your own blood. I am choosing the law. Dad, I shouted back, losing control. You stole that money. I saw the signatures. You do not know what you are seeing, he screamed, stepping into my personal space. He was big, imposing, radiating heat and scotch. It is complicated finance. You are too stupid to understand how development works, so you call it theft. Sir, step back. 2 security guards appeared at the door, hands on their belts. Don't you touch me! My father snarled at them. I am leaving. I am done with this place. And I am done with her. He turned back to me. His eyes were cold, devoid of anything resembling love. You are dead to us. Grace, do not call. Do not come to the house. If I see you on my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing. You want to be a lawyer? Fine. You can talk to ours. He turned and stormed out. My mother lingered for a second. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. I hope it is worth it, she said softly. I hope being right keeps you warm at night. Then she followed him. The silence they left behind was deafening. Every eye in the lobby was on me. Lena walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I am okay. I lied. I am okay. An hour later, the summons came. Judge Klein wanted to see me in chambers. I walked to the courthouse in a daze. I expected a reprimand. The scene in the lobby had probably been reported. The blog post was making waves. Judges hated media circuses. I knocked on the heavy oak door. Enter. Judge Klein was sitting at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files. She wasn't wearing her robe. She looked smaller in a gray cardigan. More human. Sit down. Ms. Martin. I sat. I braced myself for the lecture. I heard about the disturbance at your office, she said, not looking up from a file. I apologize. Your Honor, it won't happen again. She took off her glasses and looked at me. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unreadable. She stood up, walked to a small carafe on a side table, and poured a glass of water. She set it in front of me. Drink. You look like you're going to pass out. I took a sip. My hand shook, the water rippling in the glass. I am not going to lecture you on the decorum of your relatives, Klein said, leaning back against her desk. But I need to ask you a question, and I need an honest answer. She crossed her arms. Are you prepared for this? I have the evidence, Your Honor. I have the flash drive. I am not talking about the evidence, she said sharply. I am talking about the cost. You are suing your own blood. Grace, in a town this size, that is not just a legal strategy, it is a social suicide pact. I know. I whispered. Do you? She tilted her head. The law is a blunt instrument. It cuts things apart. It doesn't sew them back together. If you pursue this fraud claim, you might put your father in prison. Can you live with that? I looked at the water glass. I thought about Mr. Alvarez carrying his groceries up the broken stairs. I thought about the mold in Sarah's room. I thought about Evan's smirk. They hurt people. I said, they hurt people to buy bigger houses. If I don't stop them, who will? Klein studied me for a long moment. Being right is expensive. Ms. Martin, she said softly, the law doesn't erase the human cost of being right. You will lose your family. You might lose your standing in certain circles. You will be lonely. She walked back to her chair and sat down. But, she added, picking up her pen, if you can withstand the fire, you might just forge something worthwhile. She dismissed me with a wave. Get some sleep. You look terrible. I didn't sleep. I went to see Dr. Nina Park. I had been seeing Nina for 2 years, trying to undo the knots my parents had tied in my psyche. Her office was a sanctuary of soft light and neutral tones. I told her everything: the meeting with Lydia, the signature, the explosion in the lobby. I feel like I am killing them, I confessed, curling into the corner of the couch. I feel like the bad guy. Why? Nina asked calmly. Because I am the one pulling the trigger. No, Nina corrected gently. You are the one pointing at the gun they are holding. There is a difference. She leaned forward. Grace, we have talked about this. You spent 30 years trying to buy their love with achievement. First grades, then trophies, then law school. It was a transaction. You thought if you were good enough, they would love you. I nodded, wiping my eyes. But the currency they deal in isn't love, Nina said. It is control and compliance. You are finally refusing to pay. That feels like a betrayal to you because you were trained to prioritize their comfort over your reality. But it is not betrayal. It is survival. It doesn't feel like survival, I said. It feels like I'm cutting off a limb. Sometimes, Nina said, a limb is gangrenous, and you have to cut it off to save the body. The next week, the reality of the legal battle set in. We were in court for a motion hearing. Sterling and Crown had filed a motion to exclude the evidence on the flash drive, claiming it was obtained through improper means and violated corporate confidentiality. Marcus Thorne was in rare form. He paced the courtroom like a caged tiger, arguing that I had solicited stolen property from a disgruntled former employee. Your Honor, this is fruit of the poisonous tree, he bellowed. Ms. Martin met with this individual in a diner, off the record, and accepted stolen corporate data. It is inadmissible. I stood up to argue. Your Honor, the whistleblower protection laws. Counselor, Judge Klein snapped, did you file a brief in opposition to this motion? Yes, Your Honor. I filed it this morning. This morning? Klein picked up a calendar. The deadline was yesterday at 5 o'clock. I thought... You thought what? That the rules of civil procedure are suggestions? Klein slammed the file shut. The brief is untimely. I am not reading it. My stomach dropped through the floor. As for the motion to exclude, she continued, looking at Thorne, I am granting it in part. The documents on this drive are temporarily excluded until we can hold an evidentiary hearing on how they were obtained. Thorne smirked at me. I felt like vomiting. I had the smoking gun, and I had just let it get locked in an evidence locker because I missed a deadline. The hearing ended. I packed my bag, my hands trembling with shame. I had failed. I was amateur hour. Ms. Martin. I looked up. Judge Klein was holding out a thick black binder. Take this, she said. I walked up and took it. It was heavy. What is it? I asked. Sample motions, she said, from my days in practice. How to authenticate whistleblower evidence. How to argue the crime-fraud exception to privilege. How to file a motion for reconsideration when you screw up a deadline. She looked me in the eye. You took a hit today. You got sloppy. Thorne is banking on you giving up because you feel outmatched. She leaned over the bench. Study these. You are not out. Grace, you are just not done. I went home and threw the binder on my kitchen table. I was exhausted. My head pounded. I wanted to quit. I wanted to call Evan and say you win. Just leave me alone. I sat down at my laptop to type a resignation letter to Lena. I couldn't do this. I was hurting the nonprofit. I was hurting myself. I opened my email to find the draft. As I searched for resignation, an old email popped up in the search results from years ago. Sender: James Connolly. Subject: Recommendation letter. Mr. Connolly, my high school civics teacher. He had passed away 5 years ago, but he was the first person who ever told me I was smart without adding for a girl, or but not as smart as Evan. I opened the email. It was the copy of the letter he had written for my law school application. Grace Martin possesses a rare quality. He had written, she is not just intelligent, she is fair. She has an innate sense of balance. In our mock trials, she was never interested in winning for the sake of winning. She was interested in the truth. She has the temperament of a future judge. I stared at the words, the temperament of a future judge. I looked at the messy apartment. I looked at the binder Judge Klein had given me, a judge who saw something in me, even when I failed. I wasn't a shark like Thorne. I wasn't a bulldozer like my father. I was something else. I picked up the binder. I opened it to the first tab. Motion for reconsideration. I started to read. The shame began to recede, replaced by a cool, steady resolve. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to resign. I was going to learn. I was going to study this binder until I knew it better than I knew my own face. I wasn't just fighting a lawsuit anymore. I was fighting for the person Mr. Connolly thought I could be. I was fighting for the person Judge Klein seemed to think I already was. I pulled my laptop closer. I deleted the resignation draft. I opened a new document, Plaintiff's Motion for Reconsideration of Evidentiary Ruling. I began to type. The courtroom wasn't a battlefield where I went to die. It was a place where the truth could be told, if you knew the language, and I was going to learn to speak it perfectly. The article hit the newsstands on a rainy Tuesday in October. 6 months into the litigation, I walked into the Justice Center, shaking my umbrella out in the vestibule, and saw it lying on the front desk like a loaded weapon. David versus Goliath, or daughter versus Family Empire. The headline was set in bold, inch-high letters across the fold of the Riverton Herald. Below it, the layout editor had made a deliberate, brutal choice. On the left was a file photo of me leaving the courthouse, looking haggard, my hair frizzed by the humidity, clutching a banker's box as if it were a shield. On the right was a professional headshot of Evan, taken at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. He was wearing a tailored Italian suit, smiling that easy, golden boy smile, a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors in his hand. He looked like success. I looked like a nervous breakdown. "Good morning, Grace," Lena said, her voice careful. She reached out and flipped the newspaper over, hiding the photos. I saw it online. I said, walking past the desk. My voice sounded hollow. The reporter, a guy named Ben Seiler, had interviewed everyone. He had quotes from housing activists who called me a champion of the forgotten. He had quotes from local business owners who anonymously grumbled that I was attacking success and undermining the local economy. And buried in the fourth paragraph, there was a quote from an unnamed family friend in Ruston Springs. "It is a tragedy to see a girl with so much potential turn on the people who gave her everything. It is just sad. It wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was a spectator sport." By noon. The phone lines at the Justice Center were jammed. Half the calls were hate mail. People telling me I was an ungrateful brat, a socialist, a disgrace. The other half were desperate tenants from other buildings owned by other landlords, hoping I could work miracles for them, too. I sat in my office, listening to the rain hammer against the glass, and felt the walls closing in. The lawsuit had become a siege. Every motion I filed was met with a mountain of paperwork from Sterling and Crown. They were burying me in paper, burning through billable hours just to exhaust my resources. But the article had shifted the ground. Now, everyone was watching. The fallout in Ruston Springs was immediate and radioactive. I had stopped going home for Sunday dinners months ago. But the grapevine in a small town is faster than fiber optics. On Sunday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, a girl I had known since kindergarten. We hadn't spoken much since I moved to the city, but she was still in the choir at First Baptist, the church my parents had attended for 30 years. "Grace," the text read, "I thought you should know. Your mom stood up during prayer requests today." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Prayer requests were the social media of Ruston Springs before the internet existed. It was where you announced cancer diagnoses, wayward children, and passive-aggressive judgments, all wrapped in spiritual concern. "What did she say?" I typed back. The bubbles appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. "She asked the congregation to pray for you. She said, 'Please pray that our daughter Grace finds her way back to what is right, and that her heart is softened to the damage she is doing to her family.' Then she started crying. Your dad had to put his arm around her. The whole church is talking about it. I dropped the phone on my desk. It was a masterstroke. Diane Martin didn't scream. She wept. She didn't attack. She asked for prayer. She had just painted me as the prodigal daughter, the lost soul who had strayed from the path of righteousness, while she and my father were the suffering, benevolent parents waiting for my return. I could imagine the whispers at the potluck afterward. Poor Diane. After all they did for that girl. I felt a flash of white-hot anger, followed by a crushing wave of loneliness. They had successfully insulated themselves. To the people who mattered in their world, I wasn't a whistleblower exposing fraud. I was a disappointment. I turned back to my computer screen, where the deposition transcript of the Horizon Vista property manager was waiting. Q. Did Mr. Evan Martin ever visit the site? I do not recall. Q. Did you ever show him the mold reports? I do not recall. I highlighted the text with a shaking hand. Let them pray. I thought, I have the receipts. The only place where the noise of the town didn't seem to penetrate was courtroom 4A. Judge Miriam Klein ran her courtroom like a submarine, pressurized, sealed off from the outside world, and strictly disciplined. Over the last few months, the dynamic between us had shifted. She was still terrifying. She had fined Marcus Thorne $500 last week for interrupting her, but she had begun to take an interest in me that went beyond the case. It started with small things. She would critique my arguments not with scorn, but with a specific, technical rigor. Then, she started inviting me to stay. One Tuesday, after a status conference where we argued over discovery schedules, she gestured for me to sit in the gallery. Ms. Martin, if you have time. You might want to watch this next matter, she said. It is a commercial contract dispute. Pay attention to how the defense frames the intent. I sat in the back row for an hour, watching two high-priced lawyers argue over the interpretation of a force majeure clause. It was dry, boring, and brilliant. When the recess was called, Judge Klein beckoned me to the sidebar. The court reporter had stepped out. It was just us. Did you see what he did? She asked. Cleaning her glasses? The defense attorney? I asked. He argued that the hurricane was foreseeable. No, Klein said, holding the glasses up to the light. He argued that the impact was foreseeable. He conceded the event but fought on the mitigation. He didn't try to win the whole war. He just tried to win the damages calculation. She looked at me. You fight every point like it is life or death. Grace, you are an advocate. That is good. But a judge cannot think like that. A judge has to look for the place where the law meets reality. Sometimes, the plaintiff is right on the facts, but wrong on the remedy. Sometimes, the defendant is a scoundrel, but the statute saves him. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She put her glasses back on. Because you are angry, she said. You are litigating from a place of moral outrage. That gives you energy, but it blinds you. If you want to win against a firm like Sterling and Crown, you have to stop thinking like a sister who has been wronged and start thinking like a neutral arbiter. You have to anticipate how I see the case. She waved a hand. Go home. Get some rest. You look like you are living on caffeine and spite. I was living on exactly that, but I took the advice. It was Lena who told me about the new judgeship. We were eating sandwiches in the break room, surrounded by flyers for tenant rights workshops. Lena was scrolling through the state legislative updates on her tablet. Hey, look at this, she said. The budget passed. They are creating a new seat. A seat? I asked, peeling the crust off my turkey on rye. A housing and municipal court judgeship for Riverton County, she read, to address the backlog of eviction and code enforcement cases. About time. I said, Judge Klein is drowning in that docket. Lena looked at me. You should apply? I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my sandwich. Me? I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. Lena, I am currently suing one of the biggest developers in the county. I am public enemy number 1 to the Chamber of Commerce. My own parents are telling people I have lost my mind. The Judicial Commission looks for stability, political connections, and 10 years of distinguished practice. I have a mountain of debt and a beat-up Honda. They want someone with housing experience, Lena countered. Who knows this code better than you? Marcus Thorne. I said dryly, and he would probably take the job just to throw me in jail for contempt. They would never pick someone like me, I added, tossing the napkin in the trash. That seat is already earmarked for some corporate partner who donated to the governor's campaign. That is how the world works. Lena shrugged. Maybe, but the world is changing. Grace, look at what you're doing with this case. I am just trying to survive this case. I said, what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly know, was that 2 floors above us, in the judge's chambers, Miriam Klein was making a phone call. I learned later that she had met with the chair of the Judicial Commission that very morning. She hadn't pitched me as a political favor. She hadn't mentioned my family. She had simply slid a file across the desk, a file containing my briefs, my arguments, and the transcript of the hearing where I stopped the Horizon Vista evictions. We need someone who has seen the bottom of the ladder. She had reportedly told the chief administrative judge, we have enough judges who know how to write a treatise on property rights. We need one who knows what it smells like when a landlord turns off the water. She formally submitted my name that afternoon. I was down in the records room, fighting with a photocopier, completely unaware that my career was being debated by the most powerful jurists in the state. The siege mentality was broken by a visitor I never expected. It was a Thursday afternoon. The lobby of the Justice Center was chaotic as usual. A crying baby, a man arguing with the receptionist about his court date, the hum of the vending machine. Into this mix walked Tyler Rhodes. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine ad for luxury watches. He was wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He stood near the door, looking around with an expression of mild distaste, as if he were afraid the poverty might be contagious. Tyler, I said, walking out from my office. Grace, he said, flashing that perfect white-toothed smile. It had been 6 months since I'd seen him, back when we were still pretending we might have a future. What are you doing here? I asked. I was in the neighborhood. He lied. We didn't have any clients in this zip code. I thought I would bring you a coffee. He held out a cup. It was a latte from the artisanal roaster downtown, not the swill we drank here. I took it. Thanks. Can we talk? He asked. Just for a minute? I led him to the conference room, the only place with a door that closed. He sat down, carefully arranging his coat so it wouldn't touch the floor. How are you holding up? He asked. I saw the article in the Herald. It was intense. It is accurate, I said, taking a sip of the latte. It was rich and creamy, a taste of the life I used to have. Grace, look, he started, leaning forward. I am worried about you. I ran into your brother at the club yesterday. He is furious. He should be. I said, he broke the law. Tyler sighed, the patient sigh of a man explaining gravity to a toddler. Grace, you are burning bridges you can't rebuild. This lawsuit, it is suicide. You are going to get blacklisted. No firm in the city will touch you after this. I am not looking for a job at a firm. Tyler, but you have to think about your future, he insisted. Look, I talked to the partners at my firm. We have an opening in the compliance department. It is not litigation, but the pay is good. $150,000 to start. I stared at him. You are offering me a job? If you drop the case, he said quickly. If you recuse yourself and let it settle. We can frame it as you realizing you were too close to the matter. It saves face for everyone. I set the coffee cup down. The warmth was gone. Did Evan put you up to this? I asked quietly. No. Tyler looked offended. Well, not directly. Sterling and Crown reached out to us for some consulting on a separate matter. And your name came up. They are going to crush you. Grace, Marcus Thorne is taking the gloves off. I am trying to save you. Save me from what? From the truth? From reality, Tyler snapped. He lowered his voice. Grace, I looked at the filings, the grant money, the reallocations. There is no real difference between what your family did and standard industry practice. I felt a chill go down my spine. Standard industry practice? I repeated. Tyler, They took $2 million of public funds meant for mold remediation and used it to buy a shopping center. That is theft. It is fungible capital, Tyler argued. Every developer moves money around. That is how the game is played. If you criminalize that, you criminalize the whole industry. And that was it. The chasm between us opened up, wide and unbridgeable. He really believed it. He believed that because everyone did it, it was right. He believed that the law was just a set of traffic cones to be driven around, not a line to be respected. I stood up. You should go. Tyler, Grace, please, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I said, my voice shaking with a sudden, fierce clarity. I am being the only reasonable person in the room. The fact that you call fraud standard practice is exactly why I'm sitting here and you are sitting there. He stood up, buttoning his coat. His face was cold now. You are making a mistake, he said. You are choosing to be a martyr. And martyrs always end up the same way. Dead. He walked out. I watched him go, his expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum. I looked at the latte he had left on the table. I picked it up and threw it in the trash. That evening, I had to wear the armor again. The Riverton Bar Association was hosting its annual Judiciary Night. Lena had insisted we go. We need to show face, she said. We need to show them you are not hiding. I wore my black suit, the one I had dry cleaned twice. I put on pearls. I tried to look like I belonged. The event was held in the ballroom of the Marriott. It was a sea of gray suits, clinking glasses, and forced laughter. I felt radioactive. As I walked through the crowd, I saw heads turn. I saw people whisper behind their hands. That is her, the Martin girl, suing her own father. Crazy. I stuck close to Lena, gripping my glass of seltzer like a lifeline. Grace. I turned. It was Justice Abernathy, a retired appellate judge who was something of a legend in the state. He was 80 years old, leaning on a cane, with a shock of white hair. Justice Abernathy, I said, surprised. I had met him once, years ago, when I was a law student. Good to see you, he said, his eyes twinkling. I have been following your docket. Very interesting work. Thank you, sir. It is challenging. He leaned in, lowering his voice. I had lunch with Miriam Klein yesterday. He said, I froze. Oh? She speaks highly of you. He said, very highly. She says you have a spine. Not many young lawyers do these days. They have ambition. Yes, but a spine? That is rare. He patted my arm. Keep your head up, counselor. The wheel turns. He drifted away into the crowd. I stood there, stunned. Judge Klein had praised me? To Justice Abernathy? Why? I looked across the room and saw Marcus Thorne holding court near the bar, laughing loudly at something a judge was saying. He looked powerful. He looked invincible. But Justice Abernathy's words stayed with me. She says you have a spine. I felt a strange fluttering in my chest. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was more like vertigo. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the fog was clearing, and I could finally see how high up I really was. I left the party early. I couldn't handle the noise anymore. I drove home the long way, winding through the city streets. Without consciously planning it, I found myself turning onto 4th Street. Horizon Vista. The building was dark, except for the mismatched glow of televisions in the windows. I pulled over to the curb. The dumpster was overflowing. The graffiti on the side wall hadn't been cleaned. It looked just as tired and broken as it had 6 months ago. The injunction stopped the evictions, but it didn't fix the pipes. I was about to drive away when I saw movement near the front entrance. It was Mr. Alvarez. He was wearing his heavy work coat. He was carrying 2 grocery bags in one hand, and with the other arm, he was supporting Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from my very first hearing. The front steps were still crumbled concrete. The handrail was still broken. I watched as he gently guided her up the steps, waiting for her to find her footing, taking the weight of her arm. He was patient. He was kind. He was tired. Just like me. He looked up and saw my car. He squinted against the headlights. I rolled down the window. Mr. Alvarez. I called out, Miss Martin? He smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and relieved. Working late? Just driving home. I said, How are things? He shrugged. Shifting the grocery bags. The same. But we are still here. Thanks to you. He looked at me, his expression turning serious. I saw the paper. Ms. Martin, I saw what they said about you. I looked down at the steering wheel. Don't let them scare you off, he said firmly. We don't have anyone else. You are the only one who sees us. He nodded to me, then turned back to Mrs. Gable. Come on, Mama. Let's get you inside out of the cold. I watched the door close behind them. The doubt that had been gnawing at me all day, the words of my mother, the sneer of Tyler Rhodes, the whispers at the party, suddenly went quiet. Tyler was wrong. It wasn't about standard industry practice. It wasn't about fungible capital. It was about Mr. Alvarez carrying Mrs. Gable up the stairs because the elevator was broken and the landlord didn't care. It was that simple. And if being a traitor to my family meant being loyal to them, then so be it. I put the car in gear. The road ahead was dark, and I didn't know where it ended. But for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly which direction I was going. The settlement conference was scheduled for the second Tuesday in November. It was a mandatory proceeding, ordered by Judge Klein, with a sternness that suggested she was losing patience with the paper war Sterling and Crown had been waging for half a year. The order was specific. Principals must appear in person. No telephonic appearances, no surrogates. That meant my parents. That meant Evan. That meant the tenants. I arrived at the courthouse early, but the air in courtroom 4A was already thick enough to choke on. The room was divided down the center aisle like a wedding where the two families despise each other. On the left sat the plaintiffs. Mr. Alvarez was there, wearing his best Sunday shirt, the collar slightly frayed. Mrs. Higgins sat with her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles swollen from years of scrubbing floors. Sarah was coughing softly into a tissue, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. There were 12 of them in total, a tableau of worn coats and anxious eyes. On the right side, the Martin Empire had assembled. My father, Carl, took up space like a boulder. He wore a navy suit that strained at the shoulders, his face set in a mask of aggrieved dignity. My mother sat beside him, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere above the judge's bench, refusing to look across the aisle, or at me. Evan was at the end of the row, flanked by Marcus Thorne and 2 junior associates. Evan looked tired. The golden boy shine was dulling. There were gray smudges under his eyes, and he kept tapping his pen against his knee, a frantic, staccato rhythm. I walked to the plaintiff's table and set down my briefcase. The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a held breath before a car crash. All rise. The bailiff called out. Judge Klein swept in. She didn't look at the gallery. She sat down, opened a file, and looked over her reading glasses at the lawyers. We are on the record in Alvarez versus Horizon Vista Holdings, she said. This is a pre-trial settlement conference. I have reviewed the pre-trial memorandums. Mr. Thorne, I understand the defense has an offer? Marcus Thorne stood up. He buttoned his jacket with that practiced, fluid motion of a man who charges $800 an hour. We do, Your Honor, he said, his voice smooth and confident. In the interest of resolving this matter without further burden on the court's docket, and without admitting any liability whatsoever, my clients are prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement package. He handed a document to the bailiff, who brought it to me. I scanned the paper. My stomach turned over. The defendants proposed to relocate 5 of the named plaintiffs to other properties owned by Martin Ridge. Thorne continued, We will waive the security deposits for those transfers. Additionally, we are offering a lump sum of $25,000 to be distributed among the remaining tenants to assist with their transition to new housing. This offer is contingent upon a full dismissal of all claims and the signing of a strict non-disclosure agreement by all parties. $25,000, divided by 30 families, That was less than $1,000 each. It wouldn't even cover the first month's rent in a safe apartment in Riverton. And in exchange, they wanted silence. They wanted to bury the mold, the fraud, and the theft under a blanket of confidentiality. I looked up at Thorne. He was smiling faintly. I looked at the defense table. Evan was whispering something to my father. Carl was shaking his head, his jaw set. He looked angry that they were offering even a penny. "Ms. Martin?" Judge Klein asked. "Your response?" I stood up. I didn't need to consult my clients. We had discussed this. We knew what their dignity was worth. And it was more than a security deposit waiver. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady, "the offer is rejected." Thorne sighed. A theatrical sound of exasperation. "Your Honor, this is a generous offer. These tenants are facing eviction. We are offering them a soft landing. You are offering them hush money." "Mr. Thorne," I said, turning to face him, "you are asking them to sign away their right to speak about the conditions they lived in for 6 months. You are asking them to pretend that the mold and the broken heat never happened. And $25,000? That is what your client spent on the catering for his ribbon-cutting ceremony last month." "Objection," Thorne snapped. "Irrelevant. It is entirely relevant," I shot back. "This suit is about habitability and fraud. The plaintiffs are not looking for a handout. They are looking for justice. They want the building fixed. They want the overcharged rent returned. And they want the court to acknowledge that Martin Ridge Development knowingly endangered their health to maximize profits." I saw my father flinch. His face turned a darker shade of red. Judge Klein held up a hand. "Counsel, save the closing arguments for the jury." She said, "Mr. Thorne, is that your client's final offer?" Thorne leaned down and whispered to Evan. Evan looked at his father. There was a heated, silent exchange. Evan seemed to be pleading. Carl looked like he wanted to punch the table. Finally, Carl crossed his arms and stared at the wall. Thorne stood up straight. "It is, Your Honor. My client feels that any further concession would be an admission of guilt, which they strictly deny. They are not interested in funding a lottery for disgruntled tenants." Judge Klein looked at the defense table. She looked at Carl Martin. "Very well," she said coolly. "We will take a 15-minute recess. When we return, we will address the evidentiary motions. I suggest both parties use this time to consider the cost of a public trial. Not just the financial cost, the reputational one." She banged the gavel. I needed air. The atmosphere in the courtroom was toxic. I walked out into the hallway, heading for the water fountain near the elevators. My hands were shaking, just a little. Rejecting the offer was the right legal move, but seeing my parents sitting there, treating me like a stranger, was a physical ache that never seemed to dull. I took a sip of the lukewarm water and straightened up. "So this is what you have become." I froze. I knew that voice. It was the voice that had taught me to ride a bike. It was the voice that had cheered at my high school graduation. I turned around. My father was standing there. He was alone. He must have slipped out while Thorne was talking to Evan. "Dad," I said. "Don't call me that." He said. His voice was low and shaking with rage. "You don't get to call me that. Not while you are trying to ruin me." "I am not trying to ruin you," I said, stepping back as he moved into my personal space. "I am trying to do my job." "Your job?" He laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. "Your job is to protect strangers? To attack the people who put clothes on your back? I paid for that degree. Grace, I paid for the suit you are wearing. And now you use them to stab us in the back. You broke the law." "Dad," I whispered, mindful of the people passing by. "I saw the records. You took state money meant for repairs and you funneled it into Apex Consulting. You think I don't know what that is? It was business," he hissed. His face inches from mine. "It was leverage. We were going to pay it back. We always pay it back. That is how development works. You move capital where it is needed. We were expanding. We were building something for this family. For you. For me?" I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "You left those people in freezing apartments so you could buy another strip mall. That is not for me. That is for you. That is for your ego. My ego? He grabbed my arm. His grip was hard. You listen to me, little girl. You are trying to wear a halo, but you are just jealous. You couldn't hack it in the real world, so you decided to burn ours down. But let me tell you something. Even if you win this little case, you lose. He released my arm with a shove. If you go back in there and continue this charade, if you put your brother on the stand, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? No Christmas, no birthdays. When I die, you won't even know until you read the obituary. You will be a ghost. Grace. I stared at him. I looked into the eyes of the man I had spent 33 years trying to impress. I saw the fear behind the anger. He was terrified. He was terrified that he wasn't the hero of his own story anymore. I straightened my jacket. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of the worst-case scenario finally arriving. I am already a ghost to you. Dad, I said softly, I have been a ghost ever since I decided I didn't want to be Evan. I walked past him. I didn't look back. I heard him swear under his breath, but I kept walking. I went back into the courtroom, sat down at the plaintiff's table, and waited for the judge. The recess ended. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Klein looked at me. Ms. Martin, you had a motion regarding the admissibility of the deposition testimony of Lydia Snow? Yes, Your Honor. I said. I stood up. I felt strong. The fear was gone. My father had played his last card. He had threatened me with the one thing I was supposed to be afraid of, losing them. But I realized, sitting there, that I had already lost them. The only thing left to lose was the case. I would like to play a selection of the video deposition for the court, to demonstrate why this testimony is vital to establishing the intent to defraud. Proceed, Klein said. I nodded to Lena, who was running the AV equipment. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. Lydia Snow appeared. She looked small in the chair, but her voice was clear. Question, by me. Ms. Snow, who instructed you to alter the grant reports? Answer, Mr. Evan Martin. Question, did he explain why? Answer, he said the money was needed for the acquisition of the riverfront property. He said we could cover the repairs at Horizon Vista out of next year's budget. He told me to categorize the grant funds as consulting fees paid to Apex. Question, and did you raise concerns about the legality of this? Answer, I did. I told him it was a violation of the grant terms. I told him the tenants had no heat. Question, what was his response? Answer, he told me to fix the numbers or he would find an accountant who could. The courtroom was silent. On the screen, Lydia wiped a tear from her eye. Question, I am showing you Exhibit C. Is that your signature? Answer, no, that is Mr. Martin's signature. And below it, that is his father's. I signaled Lena to pause the video. The image froze on the document. The transfer authorization with the two signatures I knew by heart. I turned to look at the defense table. Evan was staring at the screen. His face was the color of ash. He wasn't tapping his pen anymore. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were yellow. For the first time in his life, the arrogance was gone. He looked like a child who had broken a window and knew, just knew, that there was no way to hide the glass. He turned his head slightly. Our eyes met. He didn't glare. He didn't sneer. He looked pleading. He looked trapped. I looked away. It hurt too much to see him like that. Judge Klein cleared her throat. The sound was like a gavel strike in the quiet room. Mr. Thorne, she said. Her voice was low, dangerous. You argued in your brief that these discrepancies were clerical errors. Thorne stood up. He looked uncomfortable. He tugged at his collar. Your Honor, testimony from a terminated employee is naturally suspect. Stop, Klein said. She took off her glasses. She looked at Evan. Then she looked at Carl. This court has seen a lot of clerical errors, she said. I have never seen a clerical error that accidentally routed $2 million to an offshore shell company while children were sleeping in rooms with black mold. She leaned forward. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are heading toward a jury trial. If this evidence is presented to 12 citizens of Riverton, people who pay rent, people who struggle to pay bills, they are not going to see a business strategy. They are going to see a crime. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. You have a cavalier approach to your obligations under the law, she said. You seem to think that because you build skyscrapers, you are above the statutes that govern safe housing. You are not. She looked at Thorne. I suggest you and your clients take a very hard look at your position. Think carefully about what story you want the public record to tell. Because once this trial starts, the record is permanent. We are adjourned until tomorrow morning. The courtroom emptied slowly. My clients were whispering excitedly, sensing a shift in the wind. I told Lena to take them to the lobby. Ms. Martin, the bailiff said, Judge would like a word. In chambers. I walked back to the heavy oak door. My heart was pounding again. Had I gone too far? I walked in. Judge Klein was standing by the window, looking out at the gray city skyline. She looked older today. The weight of the robe seemed heavy on her shoulders. Sit down. Grace, she said, not turning around. I sat. You destroyed them today, she said quietly. I presented the evidence. Your Honor. She turned around. She smiled. A sad, tired smile. You did. You were excellent. That video clip? Perfect timing. You pinned them to the wall. She walked over to her desk and sat down. But I saw your face, she said. When you looked at your brother, I looked down at my hands. He looked scared. I whispered, He should be. Klein said, He is in serious trouble. But that is not what I mean. She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. I have sat on this bench for 20 years. Grace, I have seen families tear each other apart over money, over custody, over wills. It is never clean. The law can fix the contract, but it cannot fix the relationship. She picked up a pen and turned it over in her fingers. I want you to know something. Whatever happens in this case, whether they settle, or the jury hangs them, or they go to jail, you have to be able to live with yourself in the quiet. In the quiet? I asked. At 3 a.m, she said. When the adrenaline is gone, when the applause stops, when you are alone in your apartment, you have to be sure that the price you paid was worth the thing you bought. She looked at me with an intensity that made me shiver. There is a big difference between winning a case and building a life. She said, Don't let the victory consume you. Don't let the fight become the only thing you are. She sighed and opened a file. Go home. Grace. We have a long day tomorrow. I walked to the parking garage in a daze. The judge's words echoed in my mind. Live with yourself in the quiet. I reached my car, digging for my keys. Grace? I turned. Evan was leaning against a concrete pillar. He was smoking a cigarette. I hadn't seen him smoke since we were teenagers, hiding behind the garage. He looked wrecked. His tie was undone, his top button unfastened. Evan, I said, keeping my distance. You really have it, don't you? He asked. His voice was raspy. The flash drive, Lydia's files, everything. I have it, I said. He took a drag of the cigarette and exhaled a long plume of blue smoke. Dad thinks we can beat it, he said. He thinks he can charm the jury, or buy them. He still thinks it is 1990. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. He doesn't get it. Evan said, He doesn't understand that the world changed while he was busy counting his money. Evan, I said, stepping closer. Why did you do it? You didn't need the money. The company was profitable, was it? He looked at me. His eyes were haunted. Margins were down. Grace, materials costs were up. We were overextended on the riverfront project. Dad. He wouldn't hear it. I tried to tell him we needed to scale back. He screamed at me. He told me I was weak. He told me a Martin never retreats. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it with his expensive Italian shoe. He only respects numbers. Grace, that is all he sees. If the profit line goes up, you are a good son. If it goes down, you are a failure. He looked at me. I just wanted to make the numbers work, he whispered. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. That is what fraud is. Evan, I said gently, it is thinking you can fix it later. He nodded slowly. You know what is funny? He asked. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the brother who used to protect me from bullies on the playground. Lately, you are the one making his numbers look bad. You are the only one who ever stood up to him and won. He pushed himself off the pillar. I just wanted you to know, he said. I never hated you. I was just jealous. You got out. I never could. He turned and walked toward his car, a sleek black sedan that looked like a hearse in the dim light. Evan, I called out. He stopped. Settlement is still on the table, I said. A real one. If you admit what you did, if you fix the building, he shook his head. Dad will never sign it, he said. He will burn the whole company to the ground before he signs an admission of guilt. He got into his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the smell of exhaust and old smoke. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. It was on heavy, cream-colored stationery. The return address was the State Judicial Selection Commission. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, my legs feeling like lead. I sat at my kitchen table and opened the envelope with a butter knife. Dear Ms. Martin, the Judicial Selection Commission is pleased to invite you to an interview regarding your candidacy for the newly created Housing and Municipal Court Judgeship in Riverton County. Your application was brought to our attention by highly respected members of the bench who believe your experience and temperament would be an asset to the judiciary. Please contact us by Friday to confirm. I read it twice. Then I read it again. It had to be a mistake, or a prank. I called Lena. It was 9 o'clock, but she answered on the first ring. Lena, I said, I got a letter. From the commission. Oh my God, she shrieked. You got the interview. Lena, I didn't apply. I said, Judge Klein put my name in. But this is crazy. I am 33. I am currently being sued by my own family's lawyers. I am a disaster. You are not a disaster, Lena said firmly. You are a contender. Grace, listen to me. This isn't a mistake. They vetted you. They know about the lawsuit. They know everything. And they still want to talk to you. But why? Because you are doing the work. Grace, because you are fighting the fight nobody else wants to fight. I hung up. I sat there with the letter. I was overwhelmed. My brain was a chaotic storm of imposter syndrome and fear. Me? A judge? I looked at the messy apartment. I looked at the stack of eviction files on the floor. I thought about my father's threat. You are dead to us. If I became a judge, if I took the bench, it would be the final nail in the coffin. It would be the ultimate rejection of their world. They played the game to win money. A judge played the game to ensure fairness. Those two goals were incompatible. I pulled out a scrap of paper. I drew a line down the middle. Pros, real power to change things. Stable salary, goodbye debt. Mr. Connolly believed I could. Judge Klein believes I can. CONS. Family will hate me forever. Will look like I am using the lawsuit for political gain. Am I ready? I stared at the cons list. Family will hate me forever, I realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that item belonged on a different list. It wasn't a consequence of the judgeship, it was already a reality. Whether I became a judge or a barista, my father had already disowned me in that hallway. I opened my laptop. I found the old email from Mr. Connolly. She has the temperament of a future judge. I closed my eyes. I imagined myself on the bench. I imagined looking down at a courtroom not with fear, but with authority. I imagined having the power to stop a slumlord from evicting a grandmother. I imagined being the person Judge Klein was to me. A mentor. A guardian. I wasn't Evan. I wasn't Carl. I wasn't a builder of empires. I was a builder of justice. I opened a new email. 2. The Judicial Selection Commission. Subject: Acceptance of Interview Candidate ID. 4492. Dear members of the Commission, it is with great honor that I accept your invitation. I typed the words. My fingers didn't shake. I added a line in my head, one I wouldn't send but would keep as a promise to myself. Whether you pick me or not, I am going to finish this case. I am going to get justice for my tenants. And then, I am going to build a life in the quiet. I hit send. The sky over Riverton was the color of wet slate, a heavy, unmoving gray that pressed down on the city. It was a Thursday morning in mid-November, the kind of day that felt like it started in the middle of the afternoon. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of my Honda. I looked tired. The dark circles under my eyes were darker than usual, and my hair, pulled back in a severe bun, showed a few strands of premature gray near the temple. I smoothed the lapel of my black suit, the good one, the one I had bought for my first interview at Sterling & Crown 7 years ago. Today was a gauntlet. At 10 o'clock, I had a status conference in Alvarez versus Horizon Vista. We were weeks away from trial, and Marcus Thorne was filing motions like he was being paid by the page, which he probably was. I had to argue against his latest attempt to dismiss the fraud claims. Then, at 2 o'clock, I had the interview. My stomach did a slow, sick roll just thinking about it. The Judicial Commission, the gatekeepers. I had spent the last 3 nights memorizing the Judicial Code of Conduct, practicing answers to questions about judicial philosophy in my bathroom mirror. While my cat watched me with skepticism, I felt like an imposter. I felt like a fraud. But I was going. I grabbed my briefcase, which was heavier than usual with the weight of the new discovery files, and stepped out into the biting wind. The walk to the courthouse was usually a solitary march, but as I approached the security checkpoint, I noticed the energy was wrong. Usually, at 9:30, the line was a slow trickle of bored attorneys and anxious defendants. Today, the lobby was buzzing. I saw a news van parked in the media zone, then another. I pushed through the revolving door and the sound hit me, a low roar of conversation. "Grace!" I turned to see Lena pushing through the crowd. She looked flushed, her eyes wide. "What is going on?" I asked, scanning the room. "Is there a murder trial starting?" "I don't know," Lena said, breathless. "But look who is here." She pointed toward the elevators. Standing near the metal detectors was a group of people who looked entirely out of place in the grimy hustle of the municipal court. It was the county executive, the president of the city council, and standing with them, the dean of Riverton Law School. "Why are they here?" I asked, a strange unease prickling the back of my neck. Lena shook her head. "No idea." "But Grace, look behind you." I turned. My parents were walking in. My father, Carl, was wearing his charcoal power suit, the one he wore to board meetings. My mother, Diane, was in a cream-colored coat, looking pale and tightly wound. Evan was with them, looking at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. They hadn't seen me yet. They were moving with a grim determination, like they were walking to a funeral. "Did you tell them?" I hissed at Lena. "Did you tell them about the interview?" "No," Lena whispered back. "I haven't told a soul. Maybe they are just here for the status conference. Maybe Thorne told them to come for a show of force." That made sense. Thorne loved theatrics. If he could pack the courtroom with the titans of industry to intimidate me, he would. "Let's go," I said, gripping my briefcase handle until my fingers hurt. "Just ignore them." We went through security. I felt the eyes of the reporters on me as I collected my bag from the belt. I kept my head down. I was just a lawyer. I was just doing a job. When we got to the 4th floor, the hallway outside courtroom 4A was packed. My clients were there. Mr. Alvarez, Mrs. Higgins, Sarah, clustered together on the benches. When they saw me, they stood up. "Ms. Martin," Mr. Alvarez said, looking anxious. "Why are there so many people? Is the judge going to dismiss the case?" "No," I said, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. "It is just a status conference, just procedural. Don't worry." The doors to the courtroom opened. The bailiff, a man named Jim, who usually greeted me with a nod and a grunt, looked at me with a strange expression. It was almost pity, or maybe respect. I couldn't tell. "All rise." We shuffled in. I took my place at the plaintiff's table. The Martins and Marcus Thorne took the defense table. The gallery filled up instantly. The reporters took the back row. The city officials took the front row behind the bar. The air in the room was electric. It hummed. Judge Miriam Klein walked out. She wasn't moving with her usual brisk, terrifying speed. She walked slowly. She was wearing her robe, but she had a gold pin on the lapel I had never seen before. She climbed the steps to the bench and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the room. She looked at the Martins. She looked at the tenants. She looked at the politicians. Finally, she looked at me. Her face, usually a mask of judicial neutrality, was soft. Her eyes were bright. "Be seated," she said. We sat. The rustle of fabric was the only sound in the room. "We are here on the record for Alvarez versus Horizon Vista." She began, but before we address the pending motions, the court has a statement to make. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was she recusing herself? Had Thorne found some conflict of interest to force her off the case? If we lost Judge Klein, we were dead. We would get assigned to some pro-business judge who would dismiss the fraud claims before lunch. I gripped the edge of the table. "For 25 years. Judge Klein said, her voice clear and amplified by the microphone. "I have sat on this bench. I have heard thousands of cases. I have seen the best of this city. And I have seen the worst. I have seen greed. And I have seen grace." She paused. "It has been the honor of my life to serve the people of Riverton County. But seasons change, and it is time for a new season." A murmur went through the room. Retirement. She was retiring. My stomach dropped. "Not now. Please, not now. Finish the trial first. Effective today." Judge Klein continued. "I am retiring from the Superior Court bench." The murmur grew louder. Thorne looked delighted. He leaned over and whispered something to my father, who actually smiled. This was their victory. The Iron Maiden was leaving. "However," Klein said, raising her voice slightly to cut through the noise, "I would not leave this seat empty. Not with the docket we have. Not with the housing crisis this city faces." She gestured to the side door. "I have been working closely with the Judicial Commission and the Governor's Office to ensure a seamless transition, specifically for the newly created seat on the Housing and Municipal Court, which will absorb this docket." The side door opened. A woman in a gray suit walked in. I recognized her. She was the chair of the Judicial Selection Commission, the person I was supposed to interview with in 4 hours. Behind her came a staffer pushing a small podium with the state seal on it. I was confused. Why were they doing this here? Why now? The commission chair stepped to the podium. "Thank you. Judge Klein," she said. She opened a folder. "The commission has spent the last 3 months searching for a candidate to fill the new housing court seat," she said. "We looked for a jurist with impeccable academic credentials. But more than that, we looked for someone who understands housing law not just from the statutes, but from the stories of those most affected. We looked for someone with the courage to apply the law without fear or favor." She looked up. Her eyes found me. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt. "It is my privilege," she said, "to announce that the governor has appointed Grace Elizabeth Martin to the Housing and Municipal Court of Riverton County." For a second, there was no sound. The world stopped. Then, a gasp. It came from behind me. "Mr. Alvarez." Then, a camera shutter clicked. Check, check, check. Then, a sound I will never forget. "You have got to be kidding me." It was my father. It wasn't a shout. It was a mutter. A low vibration of pure disbelief that carried through the silence like a shockwave. I couldn't move. I sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, my hand still gripping a pen. "Me?" I heard a muffled sob from the other side of the aisle. I turned my head. Just an inch. My mother had her hand over her mouth. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, filled with tears. Judge Klein smiled. It was a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Ms. Martin," she said. I looked at her. "Would you approach the bench?" I tried to stand up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. They were shaking so bad I had to grab the table for support. Lena reached out and squeezed my arm. Hard. Breathe, she whispered. I took a breath. I stood up. I walked to the center of the room. The space between the tables felt like a canyon. On my left, the tenants, my clients, the people who had trusted me when no one else would. On my right, my family, the people who had told me I was nothing. I reached the bench. I looked up at Judge Klein. I don't understand. I whispered, the interview. You passed the interview, Grace, she said softly, leaning down. You passed it every day you walked into this courtroom and fought for people who couldn't pay you. You passed it when you refused to settle. You passed it when you chose the truth over your inheritance. She straightened up and looked at the room. It is time you saw this room from the other side. She said. The commission chair stepped forward with a Bible. Raise your right hand. Please. I raised my hand. It was trembling. I looked at it. The hand that had scrubbed floors in my first apartment. The hand that had signed the loan papers for law school. The hand that had typed the complaint against my own brother. Do you, Grace Elizabeth Martin, solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Riverton? I do. I said. My voice was small. Speak up, Judge. Klein said gently, let them hear you. I cleared my throat. I looked at my father. He was staring at me, his face a mask of shock and something that looked like fear. He had threatened to make me a ghost. Instead, I was becoming the law. I do, I said, louder, and to administer justice without respect to persons. The chair continued, without respect to persons, I repeated, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, she said. The words hung in the air. The poor and the rich. I looked at Mr. Alvarez, in his work coat. I looked at Evan, in his Italian silk, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich. I said, and this time, my voice didn't shake. It rang out, clear and steady, bouncing off the mahogany walls. So help me God. So help me God. Congratulations. Judge Martin. The room exploded. Applause from the gallery. Cheers from the tenants. The flash of cameras. Judge Klein stepped down from the bench. She walked over to me. She was smaller than I realized. She took my hand in both of hers. She is all yours, she said. She gestured to the high-backed leather chair she had vacated. Judge Martin, she said formal. Would you take the bench? I walked up the 3 steps. The wood was worn smooth by decades of feet. I walked behind the heavy oak desk. I looked at the gavel resting on the block. I sat down. The perspective shifted instantly. From down there, at the tables, the judge looked like a god. But from up here, looking down, I realized the truth. The judge was just a person with a view of everything. I could see everyone. I saw the reporters typing furiously on their phones. I saw the tenants hugging each other, crying, and I saw the Martins. My father couldn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, his face red, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He looked small. From this height, he looked incredibly small. Evan was looking at me. He looked stunned, but there was something else in his eyes. Relief? Maybe. He knew, in that moment, that the game was over. He knew I wasn't the little sister he could bully anymore. And my mother. Diane Martin lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked up at me. Her mascara was running. She looked at the robe I wasn't wearing yet, but the authority I now held. Her expression was a war zone, pride battling with shame, love battling with loyalty to her husband. She gave me a tiny, trembling nod. I didn't nod back. I couldn't. I was neutral now. I picked up the gavel. It was heavy, cool to the touch. I looked at Marcus Thorne. He was standing, looking like he had swallowed a lemon. Mr. Thorne, I said. My voice was amplified by the microphone, booming through the room. It sounded like a stranger's voice. It sounded like authority. Your Honor? He choked out, given my previous representation of the plaintiffs. I am recusing myself from Alvarez versus Horizon Vista. I said. A hush fell over the room. This matter is hereby reassigned to Judge Holloway in courtroom 3B. I continued. However, I paused. I looked at Evan. I am entering an order preserving all current evidence and maintaining the temporary injunction until the new judge can be seated. The status quo will remain. No evictions. No changes. I looked at the tenants. Mr. Alvarez gave me a thumbs up. This court is in recess, I said. I brought the gavel down. Bang. The sound was final. It was the sound of a door closing on my old life and a door opening on a new one. I stood up, as is custom. Everyone in the room stood up with me. Even my father. He had to stand for the court. I turned and walked through the door behind the bench, into the judge's chambers. Judge Klein was waiting for me. She had a bottle of champagne and 2 paper cups. You did good, kid, she said. I sat down on the leather sofa. The adrenaline suddenly crashing out of my system. I put my head in my hands. They hate me, I whispered. My family, they hate me. Klein popped the cork. It made a sharp pop in the quiet room. They might, she said, pouring the wine. Or maybe, for the first time in their lives. They respect you. She handed me a cup. But it doesn't matter. Grace, she said, you aren't their daughter anymore. Not in this building. I took the cup. I looked out the window. The gray sky was breaking up. A single shaft of sunlight was piercing through the clouds, hitting the river below. I thought about the empty chair at the Sunday dinner table. I thought about the silence of my phone on holidays. I thought about the years of cold shoulders and angry whispers that lay ahead. But then I thought about the look on Mr. Alvarez's face. I thought about the weight of the gavel. I thought about the oath. Equal right to the poor and to the rich. I took a sip of the champagne. It was dry and cold. To justice, Klein said, raising her cup. To justice. I replied, I wasn't Grace Martin. The disappointment, I wasn't Grace Martin. The failure, I was Judge Martin. And I had a lot of work to do. Thank you for listening to Family Said I Failed. Then the judge asked me to take the bench herself. This was a story about the heavy cost of integrity and the long, lonely road to justice. I hope Grace's journey resonated with you. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? Have you ever had to choose between your family and your principles? And do you think Grace made the right choice in the end? Please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories for more dramas about family betrayal and the sweet taste of vindication. Until next time, remember, the best revenge is not just success, it's justice.